welcome to the HFG show, where we are going to be talking about the timeline that we will be exploring. Remember, this is just an introduction, as there's too much information to go into in detail. That will have to be in the actual video coming in the future. So, we begin 55 million years ago when the African plate and the European plate collided, bringing the rock up from the depths that was once the sea. With it, the monolith, the guardian of the straits, was born. But wait, for the mighty rock was still not the guardian of the straits that bears its name and the entrance to the Mediterranean.
That is correct, my boy. But we shall move forwards in the timeline. The continents keep shifting. The megabeasts, they've come and they've gone. And approximately 5 million years ago, the Atlantic Ocean broke through the Straits of Gibraltar. That was holding the Great Ocean back during the Messian salinity crisis, which is when the Mediterranean Sea dried up. It took approximately 2 years for the Mediterranean to fill up again, bringing an end to the crisis and the beginning to what will be the Mediterranean Sea, and with it the creations of all the peoples and civilizations that would form it, from the Neanderthals to the Phoenicians and the Hittites to the Egyptians to the Sea peoples and the Mesopotamians. We also had greats like Alexander. All this would not have happened had it not been for the opening of the Mediterranean Sea through the Straits of Gibraltar.
Well, that was the opening of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, we move on 42,000 years ago, where the last of the Neanderthals held at Gorman's Cave until their final extinction. Between 800 BC and 200 BC, the Phoenicians would leave the regular gifts and offerings to their gods within the caves at Gibraltar. They travelled the seas or went towards the trade posts which they had colonized within the neighboring area of Spain.
Tyre is a Phoenician city on the most eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, which then made trading hubs, of which those trading hubs then became colonies, of which Carthage was one of them. In 332 BC, Tyre was conquered by Alexander the Great, resulting in Carthage becoming its own independent entity, and from then on rose into the great power of the Mediterranean. After this came the next events, which was the rise of Rome, and with it the two great powers met, which would eventually lead to inevitable conflict. These would be called the Punic Wars, and they raged between 264 BC to 146 BC. And with the complete destruction of Carthage by the end of it. The Romans overtook the Carthaginian cities, for example, Cadiz, Sevilla, and Bologna, which are neighboring Gibraltar.
As we know, the Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean Sea for centuries. However, Rome's fall in 410 AD to the Visigoths, who finally sacked Rome, what was up to the point of the center of the biggest, most powerful and longest lasting empires within the region of Europe and Africa. After the sacking of Rome, the Vandals and the Goths migrated past Gibraltar into northern Africa, and the rest of Iberian Peninsula was taken over by the Visigoths, with Toledo becoming the capital.
That is correct, my boy. After that, we have the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but yet the Eastern Roman Empire still survived, which by this point had changed its name to the Byzantine Empire. They continued the wars of the Romans against the Persians, which by this point were known as the Sasanian Empire. While the Byzantines and the Sasanians continued with their ancient conflict, which had begun in 54 BC, and had continued to what is now 610 AD. Yet, from Mecca and Medina rose the religion of Islam, and with it, came its warriors of faith, which pushed back both the Eastern Roman Empire, now the Byzantine, and the Sasanian Empire.
By 642 AD, the Arabs have conquered Egypt from the Byzantine Empire and now set their sights on the lands of the Berbers. This was not easy, for the land was vast and a lot of the Berbers were nomadic tribes, which were hard to pin down and monitor. Nevertheless, what had now become the Umayyad Caliphate reached all the way from Damascus to the Atlantic in Morocco.
After its conquest, the Berbers were converted to Islam. By 710 AD, an expeditionary force landed in Tarifa, Spain, where it came to the realization that the Visigoth kingdom was in disarray. By 711, Tariq bin Ziyad led the recently converted Berbers on the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. They landed somewhere near Gibraltar upon this conquest, and upon landing, he named the rock Jabal Tariq, or Tariq's Mountain. Over the years, this name got corrupted into the name we all recognize as Gibraltar.
After this conquest carried on, they defeated the Visigoths all the way to the Pyrenees, then proceeded into nowadays France, halted by the French. This was the furthest that the Umayyad Caliphate would reach into Europe.
We have reached the year 720 AD. On our timeline, Spain is now mostly under Umayyad control except for a small region in the north. However, this is where the Reconquista would start. The Crusades will be called jihads. We'll have taifas, which is city-states. The creation of Portugal, Navarra, Aragon, Castile, which would eventually lead to the modern-day Spain and Portugal. The Reconquista would take approximately 800 years for it to finally finish, so there's a lot of history behind it. However, the beginnings of Gibraltar's story actually start within the Reconquista, and its first settlement started in 1160 AD. We have now reached the year 720 AD on our timeline. Spain is now mostly under Umayyad control except for a small region in the north. This is where the Reconquista would start, and where kingdoms such as Castile, Navarra, Aragon would be created. For the Reconquista actually is 800 years. It's not just one war, it's many wars. You will see the creation of Portugal, invasions from Morocco into the Iberian Peninsula, Crusades would be called, and within these 800 years is where the story of the city of Gibraltar actually starts, with its first settlement that we know of, which started in 1160 AD. Well, that's it for today, unfortunately. We shall leave it at the year 1160 AD. Now, on part 2, we shall progress in the timeline up to 1704. And I promise that it had some interesting bits. For now, we start having the Ottoman Empire coming into the picture, and the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, to name a few, plus the Black Death, and the introduction of gunpowder, which does make a difference to warfare. We shall be explaining all these things in our next video, so I hope you tune in. And you must appreciate that this is actually just an introduction. The timeline is to give you structure to know what the videos, once we finish the timeline, are going to be based on. And we shall be going into in-depth into all these topics. Well, now a word from my son.
Hope you enjoyed that. I hope to see you in the next video in part 2 and in all our other videos. So yeah, bye.